HB0100. We continue our work just to kind of recap where we are for everyone and for those of you joining us online. We have been working this week trying to see if we can pull the Senate to the House position on House Bill 100, the 6231 plan. It's been a lot of work behind the scenes, a lot of sitting down with fellow legislators on both sides. And we have in front of us this week 4 different amendments that have been suggested. One by the House side, 3 by the Senate side. Those reflect some requests that came from our membership in both of those chambers. We have not heard from the public, and this morning we would like to do that. The tentative plan today, and it's tentative because we're trying to finish up all the other work of the legislature as well. Tentative plan is we're going to take some public testimony until about 9:45 this morning. We'd love to hear from folks. We are inclined to hear from our fellow legislators this afternoon. Around 4 o'clock is when we will take up this bill in earnest to try to see where we can get with this. We want to hear from folks. I wanted to share with the committee, and Michael, maybe you could bring up, let's get started right away, just so you know that we do have a Casper map. That is what is being worked on by the county clerk in Casper. As you can see, that left-west side between Senator Anderson and Senator Landon, which has just been an oddity, has been filled in part of 57. So that's the map. That is the Casper Amendment. So committee, unless you have any questions on that, I'm inclined to move to some testimony from our public.
Sounds good,
Anything, committee? Mr. Co-Chairman, thoughts? Okay, would anyone like to come forward and visit with us about any of these amendments, or about the process, or about what you'd like to see happen? We would ask that you please state your name and
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Sabrina King, and I want to be clear that I'm here today not on behalf of any organization or the folks that I usually work for in this legislative body, but I have been working over the course of the past 8 months with a pretty significant group of people in South Cheyenne who have really been advocating for their community. And so I appreciate the opportunity today to speak to that work. As folks may be well aware, the community of South Cheyenne is a community of interest. They are largely made up of, working class folks. So they have made it to some of the interim committee hearings.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I was going to see if Michael could put the Laramie County map up, please. Thank you very much. Ms. King, please.
And I appreciate that, because I don't know, I know vaguely where South Cheyenne is.
Correct. Sorry for that interrupt. And it's Ms. King, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thank you, Ms. King. We'll get that up on the screen. Please continue.
Great. So many of the folks in South Cheyenne did take time out of their day jobs when the interim committee was meeting, sometimes waiting for hours to testify, coming back when they didn't have the opportunity. They have emailed and called and advocated to their local legislators because the map that has existed for the past 10 years splits the community of South Cheyenne into 4. And they have the population and the community to have 2 House seats and 1 Senate seat. And that has been what the community has been advocating for. I got drawn into this because I am involved in the legislative process. I know a lot of the folks in South Cheyenne, and so they have asked me to help advocate on their behalf. So that is what I'm here to do today, because the map that you see in front of you is not the map that the community of South Cheyenne has been advocating for. It splits in the House. It splits South Cheyenne into 3, which is better than being split into 4. But also right now in the Senate, South Cheyenne is split into 2 Senate seats. And my understanding of how this would be nested is it would split South Cheyenne into 3 different Senate seats. And at the very least, what the community has been advocating for is, let on my map, the colors are different, but the pink and the blue, those two right there, being nested as one Senate seat to give South Cheyenne the best opportunity possible to have a representative from their community. And I will say, from my perspective as a resident of the state of Wyoming, as someone who's made this my home, I think representation matters. And this is a community that is a very, that is a community that has grown over the course of the past 10 years, that has really solidified in its self-identity. They have worked over the course of the past 2 years to ensure that they have, they split the school board. Now they have 3 triads. One of those, the way that they've set it up is one of those triads is from South Cheyenne, so that South Cheyenne has a seat on the school board. They really have been advocating for their community of interest. And of the 6 people who represent this community right now in this legislature, only one of those people is actually from South Cheyenne. So this is a group of people that has been working very hard for their community, advocating for what they want. And the reason this map looks like it does is and I'm just going to say this out loud, but it is because sitting legislators don't want to run against each other. It is not because this is the best map for South Cheyenne. And I think the least that we could do is ensure that they get a nested Senate seat. And if not that, maybe fixing it so that we do actually have 2 House districts that work for South Cheyenne. So really appreciate the time. I do appreciate all the work of the committee, but I will say that the folks in South Cheyenne, this is not their job. This is not what they get paid to do. And they have been working very hard to make sure that they are represented in this body, and would really appreciate the consideration at the very least of a Senate nested seat, if not fixing the seat to represent the community in the House.
Okay, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and maybe Chairman Zwanitzer can help with this, but there are different percentages in those within the 3 House districts that now contain the population you're talking about. There's different percentages. 2 of them are in the 30s, I think, and 1 was in the teens, if I recall from yesterday's testimony. So which districts are they? Maybe blow that map up so we can get a little closer. The colors, and I'm color deaf, so I can't, I don't know what the colors are, but blue, pink, or salmon, or orange, is that the 3 districts? Or are we talking about the yellow on the west side? So, Mr. Chairman, if we could give maybe Chairman Zwanitzer a little latitude to walk us through that.
So Chairman Zwanitzer, any help you can give us with understanding that South Cheyenne area would be great.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I don't have any disagreement with what Ms. King said. We struggled with this throughout the interim. And she is correct that what at least I would consider as a 5th generation native of South Cheyenne is divided into 3 different House districts. I believe how the plan left the House in the 6231 divided South Cheyenne into 4 different House districts. And so we tried to make an improvement on that. And I would say there's some disagreement on South Cheyenne being a demographic area versus South Cheyenne being a minority population demographic. And so when we look at what I would consider geopolitical boundaries, the city limits, the sewer water district of South Cheyenne, perhaps there's some maybe disagreement on what the South Cheyenne residents are seeking, if that's more of a larger minority population in those districts versus what I would consider, the entire kind of South Cheyenne area south of what we'd consider Lincoln Way. We did have conversations internally in Laramie County with my good colleagues in the Senate, and I believe the House members did leave it up to the senators on how they would like to nest. I think the significant difficulty, if you look on that map, the orange area, when we added a population in Cheyenne, the senator who represents the South Side lives in that area, and so we did in multiple maps take out roughly 85% of her district, and so putting the pink area with that orange area is close to giving her the at least half of her Senate district back by combining those 2 areas, which does then leave that green area either to partner with the yellow or the western kind of lighter green area. That also has our military base, which has a maybe more significant minority population. But we really, truly we have 5 incumbents and not structuring them against one another, we let the senators decide how to nest those. And so if you want to, I'm certainly willing, if you go back and talk to the Laramie County senators on nesting situations, I don't believe the House members have any dog in that fight. So certainly take that back and see if they would be agreeable to different nesting scenarios. Just
Well, thanks, Representative Swanitzer. Appreciate that. Any questions of either the Chairman of Corporations or for Ms. King? We appreciate it, Ms. King. Thank you. We'll take that under advisement. Further public comment? Further public comment from anyone? Do we have the capability, Josh, Michael, do we have capability of somebody testifying from Zoom today? We're unable to do that. Okay, so in the room, Senator Hutchings.
Hello, Mr. Chairman.
I was going to be honest, what we announced before the meeting, I wanted to get to public first, Senator.
So I'm not going to be considered public. Oh, okay.
Well, we want to hear from our legislators, but we want to hear from public to make sure that we get all of their viewpoints in, Senator, and I promise we'll get to legislators, if not this morning, later in the day. So welcome. Thank you.
With the Equality State Policy Center.
This room is a little tough, so thank you.
Yeah,
Get
no
that real
problem.
close for us
I'll
and
start over again.
State your name again for us.
Good morning, Chairman and committee members. My name is Jen Lowe with the Equality State Policy Center. Might be new to some of you, but not to others. I have been watching this process very closely. In fact, my first day in this role was August 16th, was the very first day that the Joint Corporations Committee met to discuss redistricting, and that was the first day I was introduced to the Wyoming legislature. Here we are 6 months and change later, and we're really not that much closer to a final map. My comments are less related to any of these specific amendments and more to the process at large. What I'm looking at are 3 amendments that are region-specific. And I think what the new folks to this committee are learning is that it's very hard to be objective in this process, that there are emotions, there are feelings, there are constituencies that you're considering, that lawmakers are considering when looking at these maps. That is not what redistricting is for. It is constitutionally required to reflect changes in population, where population grows and where population decreases. The 6231 map that the House approved, I wasn't thrilled with, but it met all of the parameters that the committee had originally agreed to. Most importantly, that all districts were within a 5% deviation. So now we're looking at a 6231 map that has regions out of deviation. And I understand that the lawmakers in those districts are willing to dilute the vote in order to keep their constituencies close together, but then you're opening yourself up to lawsuits. What I'm going to ask today is that you highly consider an independent redistricting committee going forward. You all work so hard, and your citizen legislatures, this is a job that could be taken out of your hands and given to someone who is perhaps less emotionally involved. So I thank you for your time today, and I'm stand for any questions.
Just a quick question, Ms. Lowe. What are your thoughts on the 60-30 plan that came out of the Senate? You have any position on that?
I have always figured if there was going to be any region that was out of deviation, the Bighorn Basin, I think you could make a strong argument for that region to be out of deviation. Beyond that, I thought the 60-30 map was okay.
Okay, thank you. Questions, committee? Really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Please come forward.
Mr. Chairman, Gail Simmons. I also have observed the processes, and I'm in amazement that the folks on the joint corporations are still dealing with the quills and arrows. The question I have, and you'd think after all this time that I would be able to read the maps a little easier, but it's a foreign language to me. My concern has to do with having listened to testimony and the conversations about communities of interest. And I would note that I believe that expression oftentimes gets misused with an assumption that a House district needs to be a single community of interest, when I believe that actually there can be multiples. It's just if a community of interest exists, it should be, to the extent possible, be kept whole. So one of the ongoing discussions had to do with Rock River, with Albany County. And they regularly spoke of having nothing to do with Carbon County, and that their entire community of interest is with Albany. And so when I'm looking, and by the way, I'm looking at the Dockstetter Kensky map here on that once before kind of was called the I-80 corridor, I think. And so I see that Albany County has this big swath taken out, and I expect that it's a very low population, which is why it looks so big, but is effectively the town of Rock River. So I see that, and then I go along the bottom and up, and I see that the only other place that I believe I see major changes is up in southern Teton and northern Lincoln. And so essentially, what I have to point out is that we have only 2 counties in the entire state that regularly have a minority party representation in the legislature. And so I look at this, and I don't think it was deliberate, but I just have to note that these changes are primarily in those 2 areas. Whether it's good or bad, or school districts or community of interest, I just think that it's important to note that we changed the bookends and left the middle whole. And that's all I have.
So committee, anything for Ms. Simmons? You know, I think that's, really appreciate you taking a look at that. And the area over there in Albany County has, for the past 10 years, been represented by one of the senators. That came into play. Over in the Western Valley, town of Coateville came into play. So those, as I mentioned, these amendments just reflect requests from the 2 floors.
Yep.
And so appreciate it, Ms. Simmons.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In my area,
Yeah.
the community of interest is at School District 3 in what I call UCLA. And that was a huge argument that they're bound with Buffalo. And so I think the same consideration applies to Rock River.
Thank you for that. And as you know, that particular amendment that you alluded to was in some form or fashion passed on both sides.
Yes.
There was quite a bit of feeling for Claremont up there. So that is reflective of another one of our amendments. Thank you, Gail, for being here.
And I'm in agreement with that.
Okay, further public testimony. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Bill Winnie, Sublette County. I spoke up earlier in this process about what I've come to call orphan precincts, but I think worth mentioning is I see you working with the maps and so on. You have little slices of community that end up in a different community. In the 2000 redistricting, that was Alpine, Wyoming, and Lincoln County, was grafted onto a much larger district. In the 2010, Bondurant and Daniel in Sublette County were grafted onto a different district over in both Teton and Lincoln. And I would ask the committee to take note of the I guess it's wiggle room perhaps in the judicial decision about community, a sense of community, because these orphan precincts get moved around to make the numbers come out, and I know why you're doing what you're doing, but that sense of community ought to be important to you too. And subject to your questions, thank you.
Questions for Mr. Winnie? When you brought up Daniel, Mr. Winnie, that struck the heart a little bit. That's where I grew up, so thank you. Appreciate it. Further testimony from members of our community? Members of the public, please come forward. Good morning.
Thank you, committee. Margaret Herman with the League of Women Voters, and I made some comments as the interim committee finished up its work, and just, you know, the importance of the league, to the league, of one person, one vote, the lawsuit in 1990 that resulted in the mandate, reminding us that about the importance of proportional representation. And I was reminded this morning to take another look at the Sheridan Johnson County, and it does seem to go over most, it bumps against or exceeds, goes to 5 or 6% out of above the ideal number. I'm not saying you should change it, but I said it's a caution and it's something that to be wary of. I appreciate that the 6231 enabling the Bighorn Basin to get in within deviation with the bigger new denominator, that allowed that to happen, which was good. And I guess there have been calls, there was a proposed constitutional amendment about turning this whole process over to an independent commission. Most states do it that way, I believe. I don't know what the number is. I watched this process closely 10 years ago, and I appreciated the even-handedness and the scrupulous adherence to the, well, with some exceptions, to the guiding principles. I just would wonder that from the Joint Corporations Committee, and all of you worked on it, your opinion, maybe not expressed today, but as this goes through the final, turns through the final, would you think it would be better an independent commission without complications of acceding to the protecting seats and not trying to offend, and in the nesting, does that cause complications, political complications? Just, it's a question I put out there, and I guess you can see if maybe it would be better, and maybe you'd prefer to have it that way. Just a thought. I won't say if I prefer it or not, but it seems like it would avoid a lot of the conflicts of interest or confluences of interest, whatever, driving decisions that should be driven by principle. Just laid it out there. But anyway, I appreciate all the work, all the interim work, and all the interims, and trying to respond to requests from legislators, from communities. And I think you've done an admirable job. I cannot say enough about the LSO staff. I cannot even. I think there's a special place in heaven for the LSO staff. Anyway, but thank you and that's all I really have to say. And thank you for your work. Something to consider for 10 years hence.
Senator Kinski.
Thank you, Marguerite. We've known each other for a long time, and I appreciate the sincerity of the intent on an independent commission, and I can see some appeal to it. But then I think about my district. It's thousands of square miles, and I have driven, I believe, almost every one of them. And all those people from Claremont to KC and from Sheridan to Buffalo, spending time with them, city council meetings, town council meetings, county commission meetings, irrigation district meetings. And I just cannot imagine any expert that is going to understand my district like I do. And so I'm just loath to turn it loose to somebody to start drawing lines that doesn't really understand my people. And so on balance, I just come down against an independent panel, as difficult as this process is. But because we're friends, I just wanted to share that with you.
Ms. Herman, any
Mr. Kinski
comments
came to my wedding, as a matter of fact. Mr. Chairman, I will just parting word, say, yes, your familiarity, your investment in a district informs to a great extent. I'm just wondering if it also poses other maybe confounding elements as well in some cases. That's all I'm saying.
So, Ms. Herman, the other thing in the Senate, I can't speak for the House on this issue, but this whole thing about our little community of Claremont, 1889, by the way, my great-great-grandfather homesteaded in Claremont. So That's a little tidbit of information for you, but we really had a great debate, I thought, about this community of interest thing. I admit, maybe it's overused a little bit, misunderstood a little bit, but is it worth going over deviation a little bit just to take care of a community that has so much affinity to another community versus something 80 miles away? And it is difficult to ponder those, isn't it?
Well, Mr. Chairman, yes, in addition to the consideration of the physical barriers, the mountain ranges and the availability of roads, they all should be considered, and I don't doubt that. I will just repeat one thing I said at the end of the work in the interim, is that a diversity of community in a district should be considered a blessing, not a curse or a difficulty that people who represent diverse constituents, I think, are forced to listen to the different sides, and maybe are better able to see solutions than people who have a single constituency, a lack of diversity. So I would just say that that's not a deal breaker. It shouldn't be considered one, and maybe it should be considered. Maybe it makes it more difficult, but also I think maybe enriches an understanding of a statewide issue.
Thank you, Marguerite. Appreciate it. It's good to see you. Further public comment this morning? Anybody else from the public wish to comment? Okay, we do have a few more minutes. We have a few more. Let's go to some of our legislators if they would like to address the committee. Is Senator Hutchings still here?
No, she had to go.
Oh, okay. Okay, is there any other legislator who would like to address the panel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to stand in opposition.
Representative Gray?
Yes. I'd like to stand in opposition to this proposed amendment on Natrona County. We had an agreement with Natrona reps on 6231. We worked really hard on that for 2-3 months. On 6030 through to 6231, and now it's being abandoned at the last minute. And first of all, I question this in terms of process. I think this is a first conference committee, and there was a 6030 plan in the Senate and a 6231 in the House, and the conference committee has decided to explore 6231, but we only have one plan between the two that is 6231, and in my opinion, minus technical corrections that the clerks are bringing, we have a 6231 plan in the House, and minus the technical corrections, I think we should adopt those, but that's what should be put before the two bodies. It passed 54-6 in the House, and while there was an amendment in the Senate, it really has not been voted upon on third reading in the Senate as a whole plan. So I think I question this in terms of process. The other thing I'd say too is everything that's been said about the chairman, and he's sort of been the spearhead on this, is true of my situation as well in House District 57. I have buildings, literally, when I go out my door and look out, I have buildings right across the street that are in the other district. Occasionally, I park my vehicle in the other district, okay? So I have the same issue. With this amendment, House District 57, the district I represent, is losing 40% of its current constituents. Now, I understand, you've been talking about the 20 to 25% you're losing, but this would bring it to 40% on House District 57. So I'd ask you to consider that, there's other people involved in this process. And I understand, the Corporations Committee looked at this proposal. They looked at it, when they looked at it in Natrona County, it actually reduced the 57 amount about a third of what's being done here in this proposal. We had 6 people testify against it in person. We had the county clerk testify against it in person. We had 2 county commissioners testify to it in person. I talked to those people last night. They wanted to testify again. The Zoom testimony is not allowed. And that was a third of what we're doing here, okay? I haven't heard one person other than a legislator testify for this change. And I guess my other question is, what's the redistricting principle on this change? I was talking to the clerk this morning about it, and, she said, you can't just draw these lines last minute with a crayon. And this proposal creates 3 new splits. And it goes against what the entire process that we agreed we were going to go through the clerk. It creates 3 new splits at the last moment. And, I'm really sorry, Mr. Chairman, that you're losing Evansville in the 6231 plan. I know you're upset about it, and I'm sorry. It really doesn't work any other way. But it's 20 to 25% of your district, but this is 40% of mine. And I've represented these folks for 8 years, and I know you represented them a portion of the time before the last reapportionment, whether it was 2 or 4 years. But, I think you're going to find that this area, for one, a lot of new people are in this area. I think you're going to find it's very different from when you represented it. And I understand that you really want this area and it to represent this area, and it's part of your, and I understand you're upset about the Evansville thing, and it is upsetting on the 6231 plan that's not going to be. It's going to be in a new district, but I'd ask you to consider the other side on this. I know these people. There's not a single person from this area, and when we were looking at it, it was a third of the proposal. There's not a single person who's asked to be put in a new district. We had 7 people testify, multiple people over email, the county clerk, and the county clerk doesn't want it. I just talked to her, and it creates 3 new splits. So I just think that to change this at the end is really outside of what we want to be doing, and it's really wrong. So thank you.
Representative, thank you. Sorry, we disagree on this one. Anything, committee, any questions for Representative Gray? Thank you. Appreciate your time this morning. Further testimony, any other legislators who would like to come forward, please? Good morning, Representative.
Good morning. I'm Kathy Connolly, House District 13. But if you'll indulge me for a second, I want to take the Joint Conference Committee back to some of the original discussions with the Joint Corporations Committee. Early on in that discussion, it was decided by the committee if there wasn't a member of a region on the Joint Conference Committee, and a region being there were 10 regions that were drawn on that original 60/30 map. If there wasn't a member on the committee of one of those regions, there would be appointments that were made. I was appointed as the representative of Region 2 because there was not a member of Region 2. And so because of that, I've attended virtually, I think, every meeting since that time, so easily 6 months, as one of the 2 representatives of Region 2. Region 2 is wholly Albany County. So I want to tell you a little bit about what we did in Region 2. We began by, the entire delegation met with our county clerk and her staff in order to understand the process, what they went through 10 years ago, what they want to go through this year. And we decided that public meetings, of course, would be part of the process. And so we established 2 different public meetings that were done both in person and on Zoom. There were also members from the Joint Corporations Committee that attended that meeting as well, in order to give more information about the process. We had long discussions about what would be best for Region 2. And as the good chair of the Joint Conference Committee mentioned, that for the past 10 years, Rock River has been represented by those who are more in kind of District 47, and I think it's Senate 11, right? We had long discussions about what that would mean in the next 10 years. know that kind of Region 2 has grown in terms of population. We're one of the few counties in the state that has grown, right? We wanted and needed Rock River and that area back in the county, and they testified to that, right? We have a unified school district, and the place where people shop and work is Laramie, right? They don't go into Carbon County, they don't go into Rawlins. So it was a kind of firm discussion about the desire of Region 2 to remain whole. And I think as the good chair of corporations can testify, as well as others, that that's regularly what I testify to. That was our desire, right? Over the period of the past 6 months, kind of we watched, right, first kind of the acknowledgement, yes, that makes sense. It makes sense in so many different ways. But then there was the desire to, how do we balance out some of the issues elsewhere? And honestly, again, we're the kind of state where once you move 200 people in one area, it has to go all the way around, right? No matter where you start from, you move 200 people, you are moving virtually every other area, right? We were part of those discussions, right? We were part of those discussions. At one point, the good majority floor leader knows, right? The discussion about Rock River. On a 60-30 plan, do we take Rock River out? At another time, there was a discussion about taking all of northern Albany County out and going into Carbon County, all of southern Albany County and going into Laramie County, right? Solutions that don't make sense, right? And honestly, after hours of conversation on the committee, the recognition that that did not make sense, right? I'll be honest with you. I was not a big fan of 6231 or my community to start with. But a month and a half ago, when there was the recognition that two things, and you've already mentioned them, it's the Bighorn Basin, which has lost population. That Bighorn Basin 60-30 map was way out of deviance, way out of compliance, meaning that they got overrepresentation. And if that area got overrepresentation, the rest of the state was underrepresented. And we could not tolerate that, right? Just we being the state couldn't tolerate that. We needed to have another solution that recognized the importance of one person, one vote, right? Doing our best to stay within that deviation, and the recognition that the basin is a community of interest. So what do? And admittedly, I was one of those 6 people that sat together 2 months ago and said, all right, let's go back to the good chair of corporations. One of his original maps was a 6231. But he also had, I think, a 56 one, right? We looked at those. We sat together. We made lots of phone calls. We hashed it out and said, okay, right? We can acknowledge and solve problems with going to a 6231 plan. And we did. And here we are, right, at the last minute, going back to a proposed amendment that takes out a swath of about 20% of the state and redraws those lines without acknowledging all of the debate that happened over the past 6 months and the careful drawing of those lines that got us to that 6231 plan. So with your indulgence, that's my history of being on this committee, or being an extension of this committee, honestly, and also why I am opposed to the Dockstader-Kinsky amendment from the Senate. And I appreciate you wanting to take a good look at it and new eyes, and those of you who weren't on the committee, oh my goodness. I mean, talk about drinking from a fire hose, and I really appreciate you doing it. But that being said, know that these issues have been really hashed out, and that amendment does not acknowledge that work. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So Representative, thank you very much. Just a quick comment with regard to 6231. As you know, it came to the Senate and the Senate didn't like the plan pretty overwhelmingly. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get there. We're working 6231 first, and we're trying to get there. So Thank you, Representative, for being here.
And thank you, Mr. Chair, and I feel your pain.
Thank you. Appreciate all your time. We are actually out of time this morning. Well, tell you what, Representative, we'll take one more, and then we've got to get upstairs because we've got work to do on both sides. So, Representative, welcome. Good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. Glad to see you all this morning. I'll try and be very brief. You know, I think we've come very close in a lot of ways, and you guys have put out a lot of work, and there's been a tremendous amount of work put out. And I think, barring the last several amendments, perhaps you should go back into what had been working, where it had everyone a little bit unhappy. No one was completely satisfied. I know that was true in my case, and I know it was true in several others. That's probably where probably we'd all like to end up, is none of us are totally happy, but we're willing to live with that. So I'd urge the committee to kind of try and go back to that sort of where we were earlier. Thank you, Mr.
So,
Chairman.
Representative, you're advocating for the 6231 plan as it left the House? Is that?
I'm not,
Or
Mr. Chairman, I'm not saying that
60-30?
it has to absolutely be in that, and I appreciate that the conference committee is going to work a little bit. I'm saying these last amendments are probably a little too far, and I'd encourage you to go back to that previous place where we were, 6231, or some amendments that had come on 6030. They didn't make everybody, I'm not sure they made anyone happy. So that might have been a better place to be than to have gone too far with these amendments.
Okay, Representative, thank you. Any questions for the representative? Okay, committee, we're done this morning. We've got to get upstairs and do other work. Mr. Co-Chairman.
So thank you very much, folks. We do appreciate the continued interest in work. I think we're probably going to anticipate that's late mid-afternoon. We come back together and we'll certainly announce it on the floors, but it's a little hard to commit to it right now as we both have our final day of third reading. And so I can't commit to a time, but I would think in the 3 to 4 o'clock range, we'll try to reconvene. Mr. Co-Chairman?
Mr. Co-Chairman, I agree. We'll take it up in earnest this afternoon, committee. Thank you. We'll see you soon.